The third lock slammed into place with a sound so loud it silenced 5,000 people at once. "No," Damien Blackwell snapped, snatching the tablet from his lead engineer. "That's impossible. The system doesn't do that." "It just did," the engineer whispered, staring at the screen as a single message flashed in red. "Unauthorized resonance detected." A little girl stood with both palms resting against the black steel of the enormous vault. She hadn't touched the keypad. She hadn't spun a dial. She hadn't entered a password. She had simply closed her eyes. The crowd began laughing. "What is she doing? Is this part of the show? Somebody get her away from that thing." The girl didn't move. Then the first lock clicked open. Not because she forced it, because the vault recognized something it wasn't supposed to recognize. And the only man in the room who understood what that meant suddenly forgot how to breathe. Only minutes earlier, Damien Blackwell had been enjoying the biggest moment of his career. The founder of Blackwell Dynamics stood beneath a spotlight inside the glass-walled Horizon Convention Center, wearing the smile of a man who believed he had already won before the game had even begun. Cameras from around the world pointed toward him. Financial networks called him the greatest security engineer of his generation. Business magazines called him untouchable. His latest invention had been described as the final chapter in physical security. Behind him stood the reason for all the excitement. A towering vault carved from matte black alloy. Smooth. Seamless. Not a visible hinge anywhere. No handle. No obvious lock. Its name glowed across the massive screen overhead. The Aegis Chamber. Damien spread his arms as applause thundered through the hall. "They told me perfection couldn't be built," he said, smiling. "So I built it anyway." More applause. "They said someone would eventually crack it." He chuckled. "I've been waiting 12 years. The audience laughed with him. "I'll make this very simple." He pointed toward the vault. "If anyone opens it today..." He paused just long enough for every camera to zoom in. "I'll wire $50 million into your account before you leave this building." Gasps rippled through the audience. The challenge spread across social media before he even finished speaking. Influencers started live streams. News anchors interrupted broadcasts. Within seconds, millions of viewers were watching. Damien looked almost disappointed. "I should warn you," he added. "You'll fail." The first volunteer was a retired military safe specialist. He examined the vault for nearly 20 minutes. Nothing. An elite cybersecurity expert stepped forward next. He connected diagnostic tools. Nothing. A robotics professor tried mapping its internal structure. Nothing. Every attempt ended the same way. Failure. Damien never stopped smiling. "You see," he said, "people think security is about stronger locks. They're wrong. It's about understanding human arrogance. Everyone believes they're smarter than the person who came before them." He looked directly into one camera. "I already planned for that." More laughter. More applause. Near the back of the room, where the cleaning staff quietly waited for the event to finish, 10-year-old Nora Hayes watched without saying a word. She wasn't staring at Damien. She wasn't even looking at the giant display screens. Her eyes never left the vault itself. Her grandmother noticed. "What are you looking at, sweetheart?" Nora tilted her head slightly. "It keeps changing." Her grandmother frowned. "What changes?" "The sound." Her grandmother blinked. "What sound?" Nora didn't answer. She slipped a small wooden box from her backpack and rested it in her lap. The edges had been worn smooth by years of handling. Inside were tiny pieces of polished steel, springs, and strange little discs with faint circular grooves carved into them. They looked worthless. To Nora, they were priceless. She gently picked one up between two fingers. Across the room, another engineer admitted defeat. Damien accepted another round of applause. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice dripping with confidence. Silence. The host laughed awkwardly. "I think you've officially beaten everyone, Damien." Then a small voice echoed across the hall. I'd like to try. Heads turned so quickly it sounded like a wave sweeping through the audience. People searched for the voice until they found its owner. A little girl wearing faded sneakers. Someone laughed immediately. Then another. Within seconds the room erupted. Oh, that's adorable. Whose kid is that? She thinks it's a puzzle. One man pulled out his phone. This is going viral. The host smiled politely. I'm sorry, sweetheart. This competition is for trained professionals. Nora looked up calmly. You said anyone? The room became strangely quiet. The host glanced toward Damien. Damien grinned. Of course she can try. His engineer leaned closer. Sir, maybe we shouldn't. Damien waved him off. If a child thinks she can do what the world's best engineers couldn't. He laughed. Who am I to crush dreams? The audience laughed with him. Only one person didn't. An elderly woman seated near the front slowly lowered her glasses. Margaret Rowan had spent 43 years designing precision mechanical systems before retiring. She had spent decades around inventors. She knew the difference between confidence and certainty. The little girl wasn't acting brave. She was acting familiar. That bothered her. Nora walked toward the vault without rushing. Every camera followed. She stopped 3 feet away. Instead of reaching toward it, she listened. The silence became uncomfortable. What is she waiting for? Someone whispered. Another person chuckled. Maybe she's praying. Nora slowly stepped to the left. Exactly 2 steps. She frowned. Then moved back 1. Her fingers brushed the cold metal. Not searching. Greeting it. Margaret's heartbeat quickened. No, she whispered under her breath. Not possible. Damien folded his arms. This should be entertaining. Nora placed both hands flat against the steel. She closed her eyes. The crowd laughed again. Someone clapped sarcastically. Another shouted, Need a hint. She ignored all of them. Her breathing slowed, almost as though she was trying to hear something hidden beneath the noise. The laughter faded. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. Damien looked toward the cameras. I think we've seen enough. A tiny metallic sound interrupted him. So quiet that only the people closest to the vault heard it. Then came another. The vault emitted a deep vibration that rolled through the floor. Every engineer in the room looked up simultaneously. Damien's smile disappeared. His tablet vibrated inside his jacket. He pulled it out. A warning flashed across the screen. First resonance gate. Unlocked. His face turned white. His chief engineer stared over his shoulder. That's impossible. No, Damien muttered, almost to himself. It can't be. The first layer of the vault slowly separated by less than half an inch before locking into a new position. A section of the audience actually stepped backward. Nobody had ever seen the vault move. Nora finally opened her eyes. She looked almost disappointed. It's different now, she said quietly. Margaret rose from her seat. Her hands were shaking. She kept staring at the girl's fingertips. Then she whispered words she hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years. I know that technique. Across the room, Damien heard her. Their eyes met. For the first time all afternoon. Fear replaced arrogance. Because Margaret wasn't supposed to remember the man who had invented that technique. And she definitely wasn't supposed to recognize it, being used by a 10-year-old girl. Meanwhile, hidden deep inside the vault, beneath layers of steel no one knew existed, an encrypted system silently awakened for the first time in over a decade. A green light blinked once, then turned red. A message appeared on Damien's tablet. Original authorization pattern detected. Verify creator identity. Damien's hands began to tremble. Because there was only one person the vault had ever been designed to recognize. And according to every official record in the country, that man was supposed to have disappeared forever. Damien crushed the edge of the tablet so hard the aluminum frame bent under his fingers. Shut the diagnostics down, he hissed. His chief engineer looked stunned. Sir, the system is running its own verification. I can't stop it. You built the override. No, the engineer answered, his voice barely audible. You never gave us access to one. For a fraction of a second, Damien's carefully polished image cracked. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by another confident smile for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, forcing a laugh, "it seems our young guest has stumbled onto the first calibration sequence." Nothing more. The audience wanted to believe him. The engineers didn't. Neither did Margaret Rowan. She walked straight toward Nora without taking her eyes off the vault. "Sweetheart," she asked softly, "who taught you to place your hands like that?" Nora looked up. "My dad." "What was his name?" Nora hesitated. "My grandma says not to tell strangers." Margaret nodded. "That's smart." She crouched until they were eye level. "But I need you to trust me. Please." Nora searched her face for a moment. Then she whispered, "Caleb Hayes." Margaret's expression froze. The color drained from her face. "No." Nora frowned. "You know him?" Margaret stood so suddenly that the chair behind her tipped over. "I don't know Caleb Hayes." She swallowed hard. "I knew Caleb Underwood." The wooden box slipped from Nora's hands and landed on the floor with a dull thud. Tiny polished metal discs rolled across the stage. Damien saw them. His heartbeat exploded. Not because they were valuable, because he recognized every single one. 20 years ago, he had watched another man carve those exact patterns into steel by hand. "No," Damien whispered. "Those should have been destroyed." Nora hurried to collect the pieces. One small disc spun across the floor until it stopped beside Margaret's shoe. Margaret picked it up. The grooves weren't random. They formed a precise spiral. Her fingers began shaking. "I've seen this before." The memories rushed back all at once. A cramped workshop. An exhausted inventor. Coffee-stained notebooks. Hundreds of failed prototypes. Success. She remembered Caleb standing over a steel cylinder, smiling like a little boy. "They all think locks need stronger walls," he had laughed. "They're listening with their eyes." Margaret had asked what he meant. Caleb had gently placed her hand against the metal. "Close your eyes." She had. First, nothing. She felt it. Tiny vibrations. Different frequencies bouncing through solid steel. He smiled. "Every piece of metal has a voice." She had laughed. Until he predicted every movement inside the mechanism without opening it. It had seemed impossible. Until today. Margaret looked back at Nora. "My God." Across the stage, Damien interrupted the silence. "That's enough." Security immediately stepped forward. "We appreciate the entertainment, but the demonstration is over." Nora looked confused. "I didn't finish." "You've done enough." "No." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "My dad always said if you stop halfway." She turned toward the vault. "It gets angry." The crowd laughed nervously. Damien didn't, because Caleb used to say those exact words. Word for word. His pulse pounded in his ears. She couldn't know that. Us. His thoughts were interrupted by another sound. The vault moved again. Not because Nora touched it. Because it was waiting. A soft mechanical hum spread through the room. Engineers scrambled toward their monitors. One shouted, "Layer 2 is requesting synchronization." Another yelled, "It shouldn't even exist." "What do you mean it shouldn't exist?" "The blueprints only show one locking system." Margaret slowly turned toward Damien. "The public blueprints." Damien said nothing. "You lied," she whispered. "There were always more layers." Still nothing. "Why?" He finally answered. "Trade secrets." "No." Margaret took another step. "You hid something." The room had become so quiet that every whispered word echoed. Nora walked closer to the vault again. This time nobody laughed. Thousands of people watched without making a sound. She rested one finger against the steel. Moved it slowly. Stopped. Twice. 3 times. Nothing. She smiled. "There you are." Her palm settled against a spot barely visible beneath the polished surface. Another deep vibration rolled through the floor. The second seal released. The audience gasped as an invisible seam stretched across the front of the vault like a crack appearing in frozen ice. The impossible machine was opening itself. Someone in the audience shouted, "She's actually doing it!" Within seconds, social media exploded. Millions became tens of millions. News stations abandoned their scheduled programming. Every screen in the country seemed to show the same image. A little girl. A black vault. A billionaire who suddenly looked terrified. Backstage, Damien's legal advisor grabbed his arm. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing." "Then why are you sweating?" Damien ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Nora. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't experimenting. She was remembering. That realization terrified him more than anything. His phone vibrated. A private alert. Internal archive access risk, 87%. Another message followed almost instantly. Recommend initiating protocol Ashfall. Damien stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the confirmation button. If he activated Ashfall, everything hidden inside the vault would be erased forever. Every document, every recording, every prototype, everything. He had sworn never to use it. Now he wasn't sure he had a choice. Margaret saw his thumb moving. "What are you doing?" "Protecting my company." From a child. From history. Those 3 words hit Margaret like a freight train. She finally understood. This had never been about protecting technology. It had been about burying the man who created it. Before she could stop him, Damien pressed the button. Nothing happened. Nothing anyone else could see. Deep inside the vault, behind layers no engineer knew existed, silent motors awakened. Tiny drives began spinning. A hidden chamber unlocked. Microheaters warmed stacks of paper. Chemical capsules armed themselves. A digital voice echoed through the sealed compartment. Protocol Ashfall initiated. Evidence purge in 90 seconds. Nora's smile vanished instantly. She pressed both hands against the steel again. "No." Margaret heard her whisper. "What is it?" "They're burning it." Margaret frowned. "What?" "My dad said." Nora's breathing quickened. "If the vault ever starts humming like this." She closed her eyes. "It means someone inside is trying to make it forget." The audience couldn't hear the faint sound. She could. Damien's head snapped toward her. "How do you know about Ashfall?" Nora slowly opened her eyes. "I don't know what Ashfall is." She looked directly at him. "But I know that's not the sound it's supposed to make." For the first time since the event began, Damien's confidence shattered completely. Around the world, millions watched him take an unconscious step backward. People could sense it. Something was horribly wrong. If you were standing in that room, watching a 10-year-old refuse to back away while every expert stood frozen, what would you have done? Would you trust the billionaire everyone admired, or the child who somehow knew the vault better than its creator? Drop a comment below, because the next few moments would force everyone there to choose a side. A loud alarm suddenly ripped through the convention center. Not the building's alarm. The vault's. A crimson ring of light appeared around its base. The giant screens overhead flickered. Then, in stark white letters that no one was ever supposed to see, a message replaced Damien's company logo. Creator authentication failed. The room erupted into confused shouting. Damien stared at the screen in horror. Because he knew exactly what message was supposed to appear next. And if it did, the lie that had built his entire empire would collapse before the countdown reached 0. Damien lunged toward the control console before the final message could appear, but 3 engineers stepped into his path without thinking. They weren't trying to stop their boss. They were trying to understand what they had just seen. "Move!" Damien shouted. His chief engineer grabbed his arm. "Tell us what's happening." "There isn't time." "There wasn't supposed to be a creator authentication," another engineer said. "The documentation says this vault doesn't identify people." "It doesn't," Damien snapped. The giant screen answered him. "Correction. Primary creator record found." The room fell silent again. A digital timer appeared beneath the words. 0:59. Nora didn't look at the screen. She was listening to the steel. "It's getting louder," she whispered. Margaret leaned close. Can you stop it? I don't know. You have to try. Nora closed her eyes again, and for just a moment the noise around her disappeared. She wasn't standing in a convention center anymore. She was 6 years old again, sitting on the concrete floor of a tiny garage while her father held 2 metal discs over an old workbench. He smiled as he handed one to her. What do you hear? She frowned. Nothing. Good. She looked confused. He laughed. Everyone listens for noise. Inventors listen for silence. He tapped the second disc. A faint vibration passed through her fingertips. There. She smiled. I felt it. Exactly. He knelt beside her. If anyone ever steals what we build, they can copy every bolt, every screw, every blueprint. He gently placed her tiny hand over the metal. But they can't copy the conversation. What conversation? The one between the machine and the person who taught it how to sing. The memory vanished. Nora opened her eyes. I remember. She placed one hand near the top corner of the vault. Not the center. Not the keypad. A place no one had touched all afternoon. Then she did something that made every engineer watching stop taking notes. She knocked. 3 slow taps. The pause. Then 2 quick taps. Nothing happened. She smiled. I knew you'd answer. Damien's face drained of color. No. He had seen that rhythm only once before. 20 years ago. In Caleb Underwood's workshop. It wasn't a code. It was a greeting. The timer dropped. 0:42. The vault answered with a soft vibration. Nora moved her fingertips less than an inch. Another vibration answered. Margaret suddenly understood. She's not unlocking it. The chief engineer looked at her. What? She's letting it find her. Nora took one slow breath. Come on. Another vibration. I know you're still in there. The steel hummed. Everything stopped. The alarm. The countdown. The lights. The silence lasted only 2 seconds. Then the front of the vault split open with a deep metallic groan unlike anything the audience had heard before. A hidden compartment slowly rose from the center. It wasn't filled with cash. It wasn't filled with diamonds. It held an old wooden case scarred with burn marks. Nora stared at it without moving. I've seen that box. Margaret whispered, open it. Before Nora could reach for it, Damien shoved past everyone. Don't touch that. Security looked toward him for instructions. Instead, they looked at the police officers stationed near the entrance. The officers hadn't moved. They were watching the live stream on their own phones. One of them quietly said, let the kid open it. Damien froze. Nora lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of weathered notebooks tied together with faded blue string. On top rested a small cassette recorder. Beside it sat an original patent application bearing a name that made the room gasp. Caleb Underwood. Not Damien Blackwell. Not Blackwell Dynamics. Caleb Underwood. Margaret carefully picked up the first notebook. The pages were filled with sketches, equations, dates, and fingerprints stained with machine grease. I remember this handwriting, she whispered. A journalist rushed forward. The date. He looked up in disbelief. These notes are 5 years older than Blackwell's patent. Another reporter shouted, get a close-up. Within seconds, every camera zoomed in. Millions of viewers watched page after page filled with designs identical to the vault standing before them. The cassette recorder suddenly clicked. Its batteries should have been dead. Instead, a voice crackled through the speakers. Testing, if this recording is playing. The room stopped breathing. Then someone finally opened my last design. Nora covered her mouth. Dad. Caleb's voice continued. My name is Caleb Underwood. If you're hearing this, it means the vault recognized the right hands. Damien slowly backed away. No. I built this chamber because paper can be burned. Computers can be erased. But truth hidden inside a machine remembers. Journalists looked at one another in stunned silence. The recording continued. If these documents are being discovered, then I was right to fear betrayal. Another pause. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. Damien stumbled into a chair. I didn't mean. Nobody heard him. The recording named him Damien Blackwell. A wave of shock rolled through the convention center. You told me my work would change the world, Caleb's recorded voice said. Instead, you changed the name on every page. Damien buried his face in his hands. I was desperate. No one answered. I never thought. Still no one answered. The silence was louder than any accusation. The lead detective who had been assigned to event security stepped forward. Mr. Blackwell. Damien didn't look up. You need to stand. He remained frozen. Sir. Finally, Damien whispered, it's over. The detective nodded once. It is. As cameras broadcast the moment live across the world, Damien Blackwell was led away in handcuffs. Not one person applauded. Not one person celebrated. They simply watched the empire they had admired collapse under the weight of the truth. 3 days later, a judge ordered Caleb Underwood's conviction reviewed. A week later, every charge against him was thrown out after investigators uncovered fabricated evidence, altered records, and missing patent files that matched the documents recovered from the vault. When the prison gates finally opened, Caleb stepped outside carrying nothing except a small cardboard box filled with personal belongings. He looked thinner, older. But the moment he saw Nora running toward him, the years seemed to disappear. She threw her arms around him so hard that he nearly lost his balance. I knew you'd come home, she cried. Caleb held her close. I kept listening. She looked up, smiling through tears. I remembered what you taught me. He laughed softly. No. He gently tapped the side of her head. You remembered what you taught yourself. Margaret stood nearby, wiping away tears. I should have spoken up years ago. Caleb shook his head. You spoke when it mattered most. Months passed. The old garage where Caleb had once built impossible machines filled with children every weekend. Some came with robots made from scrap metal. Others carried strange engines, homemade radios, and inventions everyone else had dismissed as junk. Nobody laughed there. Nobody asked where they came from. Only one question mattered. What does it do? On the wall hung the first page of Caleb's recovered notebook. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Beneath it, in small letters, Nora had written a sentence that every visitor stopped to read. The loudest voices aren't always telling the truth. Sometimes the quietest hands are. And perhaps that was the real secret hidden inside the world's most impossible vault. It was never protecting money. It was protecting the truth until someone honest enough and patient enough finally came to listen. If this story reminded you that real talent can come from the most unexpected places, take a moment to like the video. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part surprised you the most? And do you think the truth always finds its way to the surface? And if you enjoy powerful stories about courage, justice, and impossible moments that change lives forever, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes the greatest stories aren't about the strongest person in the room. They're about the one everyone underestimated.